M. The Media Project. E for All and E para Todos are focused on entrepreneurs who are building our cities and towns one neighborhood at a time. And E for All needs you. Become a mentor, enlist as an entrepreneur, or work to bring an E for All program to your community.
I'm the Media Project founder, Scott M. Graves, and I'm an E for All mentor. Believe me when I say you already have everything you need to be an entrepreneur. By working with E for All, you will garner the skills, the connections, and the confidence to see your business to success.
Don't think you're ready to be an E for All mentor? Think again. Your business community needs you to step up and contribute in a highly dynamic and meaningful way. Learn more today at eforall.org.
Ted Timreck began his film career in the 1970s. He won a Peabody Award in 1977 for A Good Dissonance Like a Man, his docudrama about Charles Ives. His films focused on creative people also include works on Thomas Aiken, Augustus St. Gaudens, and Frederick Law Olmsted. Ted documented the work of anthropologist Franz Boas and embarked on a number of films exploring the Native American footprint on the American Northeast. His musical contribution to his work is equally compelling. We connected, per the advice of our earlier guest, Doug Harris, retired Tribal Historic Preservation Officer of the Narragansett. After I had a chance of viewing his work, Hidden Landscapes, and many others, he's here to join us today to help us understand why it is so important to all aspects of our future to firmly plant ourselves in our past, to be rooted in our greater family, reaching back, in this case, millennia. Ted, thank you for coming on SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast.
You're very welcome, Scott.
I find your work fascinating, and before we get into the main focus of our interview, I just want to say it's pretty cool being on a podcast with a guy who made a documentary on Charles Ives. You don't get to do that every day.
There are a few.
There are a few. So,
a few.
Your work puts you, help me characterize this correctly for our listeners, puts you in proximity with, partnership with, what's the relationship like between you and the scholars at the Smithsonian in the work that you're doing?
I started working on this native issue in the mid-'70s. Of course, you recognize that there was a huge controversy at the time about these ceremonial stone sites. And I was working with a partner, a guy by the name of Will Getzman, who was so young. He was the producer. He couldn't even rent a car, but he was an archaeologist, trained archaeologist from Yale. And we went to the Smithsonian and asked them if they knew anything about these stone ruins. It was the director, Bill Fitzhugh of the Arctic Studies Center, who invited us to join him in northern Labrador on his excavations to document them. And when we got there, we found that they had plenty of stone ruins, and there was no question that they were built by colonial farmers. This was a native civilization, and it was like a black hole in Eastern North American history. From that point on, I stayed working with the Arctic Studies Center, so that's 45 years. Now, what the actual arrangement is that they would hire my company to do everything from documenting field work to videos for museums, or for their museum exhibits, to doing websites. And then eventually they gave me my own research position so I could continue with the ideas that I was working on, namely the native Northeast. That gave me the entree to, even though I didn't have the anthropological education, it gave me the entree to other scientists and allowed me to work ever since. So that's the actual, so I hold this research position, but the business of making the movies is subcontracted through my company.
Interesting. And the controversy that we're talking about reaches back a long period of time. I'm trying to find the words to characterize this, and it really is rooted in our ideas, our position as Eurocentric members of this North American continent, and how we've perceived for now some more than 300 years the native peoples who were here before us. Can you speak to that a bit? Because that's rooted in, really, I have to say, the whole reason why we wanted to do this interview.
Yeah, absolutely. In the mid 70s, there a man by the name of Barry Fell wrote his book called America BC, and it was very controversial. He went and talked to the antiquarians, the American antiquarians, who were, specialists in the woods, who were discovering these stone ruins that were from their point of view, quite mysterious. And Barry Fell came along and renewed this rather infamous myth of American history that these stone ruins were the remains of hyperdiffusion from old Europe, from before Columbus, before the Vikings even. Everyone from the 10 lost tribes of Israel to the Egyptians, to the megalith builders, to the Celtic Druids. These people were coming over and somehow infusing themselves into Native America and leaving these ceremonial stone sites.
Surely no one that's already here could be doing it. I mean, said with a huge amount of sarcasm and irony. I mean, come on.
Yes, and so in 76, when I began to learn, I went directly to those antiquarians, and for a couple of years, we went out and I looked at a whole bunch of sites. And very quickly, I realized that the scientists were right. There was no evidence of cultures from pre-contact Europe having had enough people to live here and leave any residue other than these stones. And at the same time, within 2 years, we figured that we would take the unthinkable and suggest that natives had built these things. Now, it's not that hard to imagine, because all over North America and South America as well, native peoples ritualize their landscapes. Mm-hmm. Everywhere. The mound builders, the Incas, the South American Southwest, everyone ritualized their landscape. Why on earth would the Northeastern peoples not have been able to do that, or not wanted to do that?
That would have been the anomaly. To make it clear for our listeners, it would have been the anomaly. They would have been the one set of cultures, or the one singular culture, to not do that. It's because it's a characteristic of humans, not just certain
scientists think. Yeah. There was room for that anomaly in our history, because if everyone came over the Siberian way, the Bering Strait, walked over the Bering Strait, walked down to the tip of South America, and the last place they allegedly got to, of course, was the Northeast. Now, if this was the last place they got to, that wouldn't give them enough time to develop the civilizations that people had in the other parts of North America. For instance, we didn't have any pyramids. We didn't have any great mound burial complexes. And on top of that, you find the point that American anthropology started at Yale and Harvard, mm-hmm. which were Puritan schools. And the Puritan premise was that these people who were living here weren't civilized enough to deserve the land they owned.
I went in preparation for this interview in the last few weeks, and I've went through a lot of my 17th century books. Oh. And Winslow, Bradford, a who's who of ideas that were written down, right, during Plymouth Colony, Massachusetts Bay, Narragansett, etc. Describing in quotes this barren landscape that God bestowed on us. It's magical. This
With a number of dead Indians.
Bounty, right? Yeah, precisely. And of course, right, before Plymouth is even Plymouth, in the month or two beforehand, they're finding graves all over, up and down the Cape. But just to point out to people, like, there's a lot of this evidence, this idea, the idea you're describing starts at the moment New England, for the English, as a permanent place for housing English begins. This idea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So then, of course, we developed our anthropology based on the traditions out of Yale and Harvard, because they taught all the other teachers all across the country. And every time discoveries were made, they were crammed into this theory. We are now rapidly smashing what I call the glass basement of Native American history. Annually, we are finding new sites that drive us deeper and deeper into the past for indigenous peoples in this hemisphere. So, given that, and the thing about the Northeast, and the thing about my connection to the Smithsonian, was that in 1980, when they first invited me to go to northern Labrador and discover these burial sites that and they actually found housing, long houses, that a maritime archaic, which was an ocean-based culture that went back 8,000, at least 8,000, and then we proved that it went back 12,000. It just goes further and further back. All along the Northeast coast was this civilization that existed from the earliest point that we think people might have even walked across the Bering Land Bridge. So, and they had their ceremonial sites, they had their astronomy long before agriculture, which is the usual reason why scientists in North America believe that astronomy came to be, because you had to have a calendar to plant your crops. It's very clear that agriculture came to the Northeast only 2,000 years ago, thereabouts. It's a very late development in the Northeast because it probably wasn't needed.
So I was just going to say, what's the why behind that? So one would assume that possibly the bounty for hunting and gathering was simply, what we agriculturalists and Eurocentric people sometimes fail to understand is this idea, that hunting and gathering actually isn't survival mode. If you've got plenty of food, it takes a fraction of the time to hunt and to gather. And most of the time, what the Puritans often, another characteristic in the 17th century is a lot of reference to the laziness of natives, particularly the men. Well, they just sit around all day long. They're not really working. And it's like, well, if you've gone out and you get a month's worth of food in a day, This
is particularly true when you're living on the ocean and at the mouths of big rivers.
Oh, right.
The most prolific sources of food you can possibly have.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy living.
We've degraded that biodiversity so much in the modern era, but these descriptions of bounty from the 17th century are it's hard for us to conceive, isn't it, in the 21st century, how plentiful those ecosystems were, as far as fish, shellfish, birds, lots of food.
You're bringing up the idea of environment and culture, which is an interesting aspect for the Northeast in particular. Let me give you a little context that's we've been working on here.
Please do.
In the 1920s, and the predecessor to this, of course, is that the Smithsonian scientists of the 1920s believed that Native Americans, the people in the, quote, New World, had only been here for 2,000 or 3,000 years. That was the bottom, right? And in the 1920s, they discovered King Tut's tomb in Egypt. And we don't remember it now, but this was a worldwide, enormous event that everybody heard about and much was made of. And that event actually, I believe, shaped certain kinds of, in America, it shaped our theories of what indigenous Americans were. For example, the mound builders were compared to the pyramid builders. You know, they were obviously rude and not sophisticated, so consequently the people were rude and not sophisticated. And agriculture, corn and beans and squash, were the important element in the mound building culture. And there was a correlation that was built up between the European development of agriculture and this North American development of agriculture. 50 years later, in the 1970s, we went to the moon, and space was our cultural preoccupation at the time. And lo and behold, anthropology began to discover archaeoastronomy in this same period. It came out, it was studied, people paid attention to it, and people had to finally realize, oh, well, these ancient native people had this astronomy, and it was rather sophisticated in other parts of the world, in other parts of North America, and maybe not so much in the Northeast, but the idea that the space revolution shaped current anthropology is the point about how this goes. When we proceed another 50 years, we are in the middle of climate change. And everybody is culturally concerned with climate change. And now the scientists are beginning to realize that anthropologically, archaeologically, we have to see change in climate as one of the drivers of culture, which nobody thought before. Everyone thought, for example, that New England has always been the shape that New England is today. So the Indians who lived here were walking around, maybe a few light canoes here and there, but they were basically people from on land and walking, and they rarely went over the next range of mountains if they didn't absolutely have to. So the scientists come along with the questions of climate and change, and this affects geography. And we now know that at the end of the Ice Age, New England was a very different place. It was more water than land. Champlain, right?
Inland sea.
Was a sea filled with whales and walrus, and it was an Arctic environment.
Evolve Rutland is an organization created by Far Vision founders Kiki McShane, Chris Fucci, and William Kelly to focus on prioritizing, developing, and celebrating women leaders in our community.
We believe that when women take leadership roles in communities, start and sustain businesses, and sit on professional boards of directors, the economy improves and communities change for the better. We advocate for fair treatment across the gender spectrum in all business scenarios, including equal compensation, family and medical leave, and equal opportunity for advancement.
Evolve Rutland is continuously working to expand its footprint in the Rutland, Vermont region in order to advocate for, connect, and teach women and non-binary leaders, otherwise referred to as ACT. The funding for Evolve Rutland services has been through private investment of supporters in the community. Join the movement by making your tax-deductible donation and learn more on how you can get involved at farvisionconsulting.com/evolve-rutland.
So the sands making up, just to give people perspective, the sands making up Fort Drum in outside Messina, New York, were a beach, were a beachhead for a much larger inland, encroachment of the, not the St. Lawrence, help me out here, of Hudson's Bay, so forth. Right?
It's the encroachment of the Atlantic Ocean into the middle of New England.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah.
It was the St. Lawrence was an arm of the ocean.
Yeah.
At the same time, as the glaciers are melting like crazy, the ocean is rising. And the Narragansetts have these stories about how their people used to live way out in what is today's ocean. And when you look at the maps, you realize that the Atlantic shelf extended sometimes more than 200 miles out from where it is today. So in that space of time, there was a huge flood. The Bible tells us so. And all of Rhode Island was covered with water. The Great Lake Hitchcock ran up the Connecticut all the way to the north of Canada. The Hudson River was huge. So there was much less New England land, and all of it was water. And it was ocean water or river drift from glaciers. Anyone who lived here, and we're now getting the dates of people who did live here 12,000 plus years ago, couldn't walk here.
Yeah. Like the idea that these wouldn't be maritime cultures, when we start to posit it in the way you're beautifully articulating it, right? It seems virtually impossible. Right. It's another aspect of their culture, because that's another big theme of some of a lot of the work that you've done is these were maritime cultures. Doug described for me the stories going back time immemorial of the connectedness through water of the Mississippi peoples and the peoples of the Great Lakes, what's now the Great Lakes, extending and coming up all the way around Labrador, through down to the New England coast, what's now Acadia in between and so forth.
These people were not just land-based walkers who didn't go far. And when we go back to our idea of astronomy and things like that, these are skills you learn when you navigate off the site of land.
Right.
You don't need agriculture to have astronomy. You need to travel.
No, and if anything, you narrow down, it's oh boy, I don't know how to describe this. It's more purposeful. You find yourself out on the water. You only have so many tools available to you in your environment to start to track distance, time, and location, right?
Stars being number one.
I mean, what else is there, right? No, I'm serious, right? That's how we make great technological advances is the need suddenly arises. That's a prescient need.
We should allow for the fact, though, that Paleolithic peoples, which is a way of just Paleolithic instincts, which is a way of describing all natural cultures, let's say. I've discovered that they have many ways of navigating. For instance, the color of water, the fish, the all of the elements, just the smell on the wind and which direction fish are going. There's all kinds of stuff that can tell you where you are. So much so that it seems that if these people are adapting to the oceans, imagine that they are now, and they're talking to animals the way we would talk, the way they talk to ancestors. In other words, there's a firm belief that you're connected to your ancestors and you can communicate with these animals. That's culturally wide and from their point of view, accurate. So imagine that when these people adapt to the ocean, however they do it, they have got a new subset of informants, right? They're now talking to animals that people on land never converse with. And everyone realizes the difference between dolphins and whales and killer whales and the other animals. There seems to be we even understand that there's a difference in the intelligence between those different animals. So there must have been a different kind of communication when you not only are you seeing the stars, in a way to navigate, but you're talking to a whole nother level of communication, of communicants.
You're speaking to a more holistic, we would say in our modern era, a more holistic approach
to nature,
to nature and being aware. It's the and it's the interconnectedness. It sounds like it's the interconnectedness of all of these parts of the system that are telling you the most, right? It's the interaction and the between different flora and fauna, as an example, and you piece all these together, and you synthesize that, and it tells you where you are, what comes next, and any number of other questions to be answered.
Yeah, it's a whole way of this Paleolithic mentality, which we think of as Stone Age cavemen, utterly useless. Once you start to learn about these things, you realize how full and complete this kind of knowledge in life can be. So let's go back to the ceremonial stones.
Please,
As an aside, in documenting these things over the years and talking to many people who are concerned about them, to preserve them, etc., I've never met anyone who cared about these ceremonial sites who wasn't quite aware of the environmental situation. And now we've been telling people we are doomed for 20 years almost. We've been announcing the fact that we're on this slide down. And what has been, in other words, I consider that the threat method of trying to save the earth. Scare people into trying to do something about it.
Right.
But it's not working.
We wrote about it way earlier than that, by the way, which I know you know. I'm letting our listeners know because I'm 47, and my entire upbringing, where I was exposed to a lot of science and all kinds of things, I was lucky at a young age. But we were talking about this in school when I was in grade school. Right. The impetus, as you're saying, the danger. At the same time, by the way, we turned up the heat on politicizing climate change.
That's true. That's true.
Which has got to stop. But like this goes back 50 or 60 years that we've been talking about it, but we're just not answering the right questions, right? Like it's happening. So forget about the fact of what percentage people want to be comfortable with that humans are accelerating it. Hey, guys, guess what? It's happening. Don't build your new house on that plot of land that you know damn well is going to flood 5 times a year. That kind of thing.
There's this interesting connection with once you understand something about I'm not even imagining we will ever understand all the elements of ritualized landscape, whether it's in the Northeast or the mounds or the Southwest or anywhere else in the Western Hemisphere or any other, but an awareness of that ceremonializing or the ritualizing or paying attention to that landscape adds an emotional component to your understanding of the environment. And if we had an emotional component to our understanding of the environment, we might have a better reaction than we do with just issuing threats over and over again. I can't believe the threats don't work, but I've seen the fact that when people do understand something about these wonderfully, actually beautiful sites hidden away in the woods at times, they have a different respect for what you mentioned before, which is this interconnection, this holistic view of nature. It's a memorialization of that holistic view.
This gets to you're beautifully articulating the general reason why we're here in the first place talking about this. So why are we talking about this on a podcast dedicated to economics, urbanism, and culture? This is the culture component. Why is that important? Because without us seeing ourselves as part of a greater family of people, and colonialism separated us from the peoples that you and I have been talking about for the last half hour or so. When we're separated, we start and we're using false narratives to define ourselves. We become a danger to ourselves. That's what's happening right now, isn't it? Did these falsehoods form basically because our Eurocentric culture was trying to protect itself or protect what it wanted. Came here for its own reasons. People came here for, it's not good or bad. They came here for reasons.
They sure did, but they stayed here for greed.
Yeah.
And we'll never get around the injustice of the way the country was taken over. But somehow we have to figure out how to reverse that in a sense of preserving for everybody what's left. And until we justify, and I don't mean justify in the same dishonest way, but justify in a real way our all of our connection to the landscape. Ancestor worship is a worldwide thing, and all of our cultures are based on our reflection of our own ancestors. But as we move into this climate period of climate understanding, we're going to equalize the question of environment and ancestors. Okay, ancestors are ancestors because of the environment they live in, and ancestors shape the environment, and that's a interconnected thing. Until we're all what that allows us to do is recognize Native Americans of certain places as ancestors to us, because a shared environment is a shared ancestry.
And shared experiences over the millennium.
In that environment, we're sharing experience, even as it changes. But it's not just your genetics, it's where on the planet those genetics have set and formed, because literally where on the planet you are has shaped the genetics. And it's an environment and culture are equal things. Culture just doesn't change the environment, even though we make it look like as a culture we change the environment. We're destroying it, and we seem to be to blame. But it's destroying us because we are so related to that environmental.
Is the solution found in the interconnectedness of it all? Like we have to conceptualize. We're siloing these different things. Yes. Our experience, our environment. Yeah. We've siloed ourselves away from the environment. We call it the environment. Even though it's indelibly a part of us, it's on the outside of our skin. It's on the inside of our skin.
We eat it. We leave it behind us.
Right. And so, but we don't really think of it that way. And because we don't, it allows us to devalue it when we need to. It allows us to see it strictly as a resource to be consumed when we need to. And these things are out of balance, aren't they?
Right. It allows us to value it, which is what the original Puritans came in and did. It's what the Europeans came in and put a different value system on the land and made that stick politically so that they, in fact, could take it over. That wasn't the value system of the land before they came. Yeah. And they did not join the value system that was here. They overruled it by saying that these people weren't sophisticated enough to understand it, the real value of the land, which simply is just completely wrong.
Right. Right. Who's winning the battle of being here for a long period of time and sustainably living? I mean, it's not a battle, and I hate characterizing it that way, but I make that wry joke because it's only taken us, well, if we're specifically talking about New England, it's only taken us 400 years,
right,
to get here, and the landscape is much different than it was before we got here.
And you say battle because the way we're dealing with climate change is by threat. At the moment,
punitive.
It's all about it's all our way of discussing it is it's in a threatening mode, and it's not in a mutual understanding mode. How to achieve that culturally is something we have to figure out quickly in the future. But not that I have the answer to that, but I'm sensing from looking so much at the past that you cannot separate culture from place. They shape each other indelibly.
Yet another reason to get right with our relationship with place. Pride in place.
Yeah. Respect for place.
SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast is a production of M the Media Project and SM Graves Associates. Learn more at smgravesassociates.com.